feel.
Hi, my name is Sue Skaski with Vermont Volunteer Services for Animals Humane Society, and welcome to our show, For the Animals. Today we have an important topic that we have talked about before, but we thought it was important to do it again because we've got two brand new guests to discuss this, Carol Scalfaro and Barry Adams, and thank you both for coming up and doing this show with us.
Thank you
for
the
having
opportunity.
Carol Scalfaro's passion in life is animal advocacy welfare. Her focus is on networking and with communities to address specific needs, whether it's rehoming an animal in need, bringing attention to and helping facilitate looking for a lost animal, situations involving abuse and neglect, or rallying community in the most effective ways to find a lost animal. She's very drawn to bringing the efforts of grassroots activists to the forefront so that they will share their efforts and successes so that others can benefit from them. I've known Carol many years now. And Barry Adams, I just had the pleasure of meeting today. Barry is a registered nurse who lives in Brattleboro, Vermont. He's also a volunteer from the national My Dog is Cool campaign, one of several animal advocacy programs sponsored by Red Rover, based in Sacramento, California. Barry, how did you become involved in this issue?
I first became involved in this issue in 2007 when I was walking down Main Street in Brattleboro, and I found a dog in a hot car. The temperature outside was about 94 degrees, and when the animal control officer arrived, she had a laser thermometer and temped the interior of the car, and it was 106.
She must have gotten the dog out right away.
No, actually, she didn't. She wanted to wait until the owner of the car returned. So the dog increasingly became agitated and was foaming at the mouth and falling down and getting up. And so I stood there and waited and continued to question her when she would remove the dog. I didn't really know anything about dog.
Well, at 106.
Yeah, and
right.
Being a nurse, I guess instinctually I started timing because that's what you do in a code. When there's a cardiac arrest, someone is a timekeeper, so I instinctively began timing. And in the end, the dog was in the car for about 25 minutes, so the interior temperature of the car could have been 140 after 25 minutes.
That's very terrifying, especially an animal control officer.
Well, it was very traumatic to see an animal in that kind of distress. It was traumatic, and I think that trauma of actually seeing how horrible it is to see an animal in that kind of distress is what motivated me to become involved. Additionally, the animal control officer actually informed me that there was no law or ordinance that authorized her to remove the animal from the car, so that prompted me to begin looking for laws, and in fact there was one in Vermont.
Actually, there is one, and I'm going to read it, and it was amended in 2003, so this was 4 years before the incident. Okay, I'll read it next, but Carol, how did you become involved?
Well, as you stated, I like to get involved in many forms of animal advocacy in my community. Mm-hmm. And
you're the ground, I mean, you're on the ground.
I'm
right?
on the ground.
I mean, we've talked about
yes.
you. I'm on my way. I'm tracking this dog that's been lost,
yes.
and I'm right behind it right now. And you've had so many successes because you know what? You're the type of person that sees something and you get out and you fix it.
Yes. And in this particular area, seeing an animal left in a hot car in a parking lot, or I have had no success. In usually, always met with resistance.
Yeah.
And people feeling they know more about how much heat their animals can withstand than you do. And it becomes a personal thing with the owners rather than about the animal. And when I heard about Barry and his successes within his own community, I thought, I have to meet this guy because he's taking steps that will affect change.
And this is why I'm excited we're doing this show, because what he has accomplished is something we talk about, we lament, but this man is doing it in Brattleboro. Mm-hmm. I'd like to read the statute. It's Chapter 13, and it's subsection 386, confinement of animals in vehicles. A person shall not leave an animal unattended in a standing or parked motor vehicle in a manner that would endanger the health or safety of the animal. B, any humane officer or member of a fire or rescue squad may use reasonable force to remove any such animal from a motor vehicle. The officer so removing an animal shall deliver the animal to a humane society, veterinarian, or a town or municipal pound. If the owner of the animal cannot be found, the officer shall place a written notice in the vehicle bearing the name of the officer and the department and address where the animal may be claimed. The owner shall be liable for reasonable expenses, and a lien may be placed on the animal for these expenses. The officer may not be held liable for criminal or civil liability for any damage resulting from actions taken under subsection A of this section. So clearly, we have a law. But also, Title 13 says an animal shall have adequate food, water, shelter, sanitation, and medical attention. So under that broad scope, an animal is protected. But the legislature felt it was important enough to address this specifically. So Barry, in your opinion, what's at the heart of this problem?
I think the heart of the problem is a lack of awareness and education in the public about how rapidly heat rises inside of a car and why a dog cannot tolerate that. And when I talk about the public, I also include police officers, animal control officers, other officials, and even policymakers. The larger public is not aware of this, and we have science that has made this very clear. We have veterinary science that examines canine physiology and the limitations of their physiology and their ability to respond to that kind of heat. And we also have thermodynamic studies on heat rise inside of cars. So we need to look to those two bodies of science to find a solution to this problem.
Okay, so how is it determined as to whether an animal is at risk within the confines of a vehicle, internal versus external temperatures?
Well, it's difficult, and it's not an easy thing to do when you come across a dog. Obviously, when they're in acute distress, when in the late stages of distress where they will suffer harm and possibly and likely death from that level of distress, that's a little bit more obvious. But on a pleasant day when it's 74 degrees or 72 degrees and we feel it's a perfect day, on the inside of that car it may not be.
Right.
And the only real way to assess that is to have a laser thermometer or some device that can measure the interior temperature of the car. At that point, it really takes further assessment of the animal to determine if they are in what level of risk they are. And so how do we do that? You know, obviously the best way is to gather as much information as possible. But we need to realize that when we find a dog in a car that is panting, even on a mild day, that it is a situation that warrants an emergency evaluation.
Well, the dog that you were talking about was actually foaming at the mouth.
By the end of the 25-minute period that I was clocking on my watch, he had profuse saliva coming out, and he was getting up and falling down and getting up and falling down. And so I'm not convinced, and I have no way of knowing if he survived. He did not die while I was at the scene, but
the brain damage.
Yeah, veterinarians know that when a dog is exposed to that level of heat, that the proteins in their brain begin to cook. And because your brain regulates your body temperature and controls everything in your body, that's where the organ damage follows quickly, very rapidly. So when the brain is cooking, so essentially the dog is roasting alive from the inside out.
Right. I do have the thermal laser, which I carry around in my glove compartment, and it's as fast as, right now in the studio, it's 68.5 degrees. I had an experience this summer in a parking lot where a car was up from Georgia, and the windows were open about that much all the way around. And the myth of ventilation is just that. It's not a myth, because air does not circulate on a hot day. And the temperature inside the car, I got out of my car and I heard a dog barking, and it was right next to me. Went over and checked it. At first, it was 87 degrees. It's like, okay, this is not good. Federal law says ambient temperature shall be no more in a kennel structure, shall be no more than 85 degrees and no less than 55 degrees. So that's telling you that the health of the animal is compromised if it goes above or below. By the time the police responded, it was up to 90-something degrees. And the officer was reluctant to use, but then it was not in Vermont, reluctant to use force to get the dog out. They were able to find the owner of the car, and by that time, the temperature inside read 125.5 degrees. It was a lost opportunity for education, because by the end of the conversation, the gentleman said, you know, I'm from Georgia and it gets a lot hotter down there. It's like, oh boy, you know what, you just missed the whole point. So there's a lot of work that has to be done. And I don't think people don't want to help. I think people don't know how to help. Some people would hope, you know, oh, please let the person come out because I'm not sure of what the statute is. I don't know how far I can go. But I think it's important to speak up. You know, that's the only way something's going to change, is if we see a situation, address it, and speak up, which is what you're doing by taking this whole project on, and I thank you. Why are dogs and cats, there was a cat in the next car that I found too, and also the officer said to me, do you carry around that laser? I said, yeah, as a matter of fact, I do. But it was looking to place the problem on me for identifying it, which was bizarre. It's like, and
Shooting
I identified myself. Shoot the messenger. Don't shoot me. Yeah. So why are cats and dogs, any living being actually, at risk of harm? Let's talk about what happens internally.
Well, with a dog has an internal body temperature of approximately 100 to 102.5 degrees. So their body temperature is higher than a human's, which is approximately 98.6. And we all know what it feels like to go from 98.6 to 100 degrees. We're miserable usually, feeling uncomfortable. So dogs have higher internal body temperatures. And when their temperature reaches just a slight increase to 104, it is considered a veterinary medical emergency. So there's a very small margin that their bodies can tolerate that heat increase. And they don't have the ability to cool off like a person. We can sweat, and that's a compensatory mechanism that will help bring down our body temperature. But a dog does not sweat like a human being. They cool off by panting and bringing cooler air in to their lungs, and they cool off through the pads of their feet. So when they're trapped in a hot car, all they have is hot air to breathe, and the seats also get hot, the dashboard, the steering wheel, everything in that car is heating up like heating elements, different heating elements. So the dog is essentially powerless to cool itself off.
Why do you think that some people will not respond to a situation like this?
Well, first, I think people don't realize that it's an emergency. There's some kind of assumption out there that people make that because dogs are natural creatures that they can endure anything, and that's a false assumption. I think why they don't respond, I don't think people realize it's an emergency, and I think that we live in a society that has cultural values with a very high emphasis on individual rights and private property rights. We value that. Dogs are, in most states that I'm aware of, are defined legally as private property. The car is private property. The dog is private property. And so I think with the knowledge deficit that people have about the risk to dogs, as well as the law, what can they do, what can they not do, they're hesitant. As well as people are hesitant to take action in a lot of situations that seem obvious.
We were talking just before the show about statistics that you had recently found out about how many, was it people?
Children.
Children that have died. in the United States?
Yes. And this year in 2013 so far, as of 3 weeks ago, was when the statistics were updated, 40 children have died in hot cars in the United States. So that alone speaks to the potential of how many dogs have died. I'm feeling pretty safe in assuming that many more dogs have died. And
do we have any idea?
we don't. There's really no way of knowing because we have no state or national tracking systems like we do for children. It's reported. And of course, it's much easier to know how many children have died. It's you know, and so we don't have a way to track it. And what the American Veterinary Medical Association is doing, and as well as Red Rover, is they're tracking media reports of dogs dying in hot cars. And that's not a real accurate way. It's the best we can do without a formal tracking system. But media reports usually only reveal the tip of an iceberg because, for obvious reasons, people don't want to report that they left their dog in the car and their dog died. Or possibly the police officer doesn't view it. Not everyone goes to the media, so the media is usually picking up the tip of an iceberg.
Interesting. Well, we've had situations here in Vermont this year. You know, I think people just don't think. I mean, you had an incident where the animal control officer said to you, "Oh, I take my dog everywhere." Well, you know, in the summertime, you might want to rethink that.
Yeah.
Because the temperature goes up very, very quickly. What changes are you seeing? Are you seeing anything positive? Or are we digressing? What do you think?
Well, I'm happy to say that we are seeing changes. I credit Red Rover's My Dog is Cool campaign because it has reached out. They have reached out to people across the country and Canada and said, we will help you. And so they've taken their strategy to the people. And this year alone, we've seen Red Rover sponsored 30 My Dog is Cool action days across the United States in towns where motivated individuals came up with very creative ideas on how to get the word out. And they've gone to shopping plazas, the big parking lots are a particular problem, and set up booths. They've done theater. It's gotten a very creative movement going.
Have they done any TV PSAs?
I'm not sure.
Boy, that would be a great way. This is one of the, I think they can see that, from Red Rover. Gets the point out. And I'd like to share now what you are doing in your community. This is really exciting. You've made great strides. Can you talk about this, Barry?
Yeah, well, when I started in 2007, it was a long process, but essentially what I did was I obtained materials from Red Rover's My Dog is Cool campaign, and the Pug in the Oven poster was the one very effective poster that I started walking every year in March. I would go to every business in Brattleboro and offer them a poster and talk to them about my concern. And I did that for several years. At the same time, I was writing to the Brattleboro Select Board and talking about my concern and that we needed to find solutions for this. I do believe public education is the biggest
I think
thing.
so too. Yeah.
But I was very successful in educating and getting the local business community involved. And so that was the first thing. And pretty soon, up and down Main Street in Brattleboro, you could not find a storefront that did not have the Pug poster in it, at least one.
That's awesome.
That was the first success that I saw. The next thing was I proposed to the town administration that we provide warning information, educational information with every dog license application and every dog license renewal application.
What a great idea.
We got that off and running right away. They put on the applications, it is illegal to leave your dog in a car in Vermont.
You've just given me a great idea. There's 251 towns in Vermont. We can do that easily. We can make,
Yeah.
It was
I have a
probably
copy
the
of it.
quickest thing because there was space to do it. I worked with Annette Cappy, the town clerk, and together we came up with a very effective message, and it went out right away So that was the second big success. And then last May, this year in May, we were successful. We put up our posters in all town parking lots, on all park and pay kiosks. We put up posters that warn the public that it is illegal to leave your dog in a hot car in Vermont, and that heat will kill a dog. So that was a great success that took off. Red Rover ran press releases, and it's gone quite far, actually.
Were these very expensive to have made?
No, 50 of those signs cost approximately $250.
That's great. That's not bad. That, I would think that would be, well, makes common sense to write into everybody's town budget, but wow, good for you.
And another strategy that we should focus on at some point is getting private big box stores. The vast parking lots of large retailers are really, I believe, the most prominent source of dogs dying in cars.
Yeah, well, my husband went inside the store to complain, and they were told they can't do anything, but here's the number for the police. So, okay, I know we're coming up short on time, but I want to wrap this up. When you've met with resistance, because we've talked about both of this, what do you do?
Well,
does it take the wind out of your sails, or what do you do?
Barry and I have talked about this a lot, and through his more extensive experience, he's found it's even bypassing that and just calling 911.
Okay, but then you have officers that respond that don't understand the law.
Right.
You had that situation.
And so then, Barry, you can speak to that.
I think the best thing, rather than getting involved in a protracted argument with a dog owner or a car owner, the advantage of calling the police is that we are establishing a data source, so that in the future, if anyone wants to, it could be accessed to determine how often this is happening. We're spending a lot of taxpayer money. Every town across the country is spending taxpayer money to have police respond in the parking lots of private businesses to monitor private people's animals in the car. So there's also that cost.
It's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, well, we are spending taxpayer money on this, so that's where the education piece comes in. On the other hand, because it is an emergency situation, I believe it's an emergency situation because of as many unknowns as what we know. I believe it has to be handled as an emergency. I call 911. I don't want the conflict. I've had the conflicts with dog owners. Some have been successfully negotiated, others have not. But when the police come, at least it's a third person, and I never leave a car with a dog in it. I will not leave a dog. I don't assume that anybody will act in a way that will save the dog's life.
Well, these thermal guns are awesome. They're only $40 at AutoZone, and or you can go online and get it. It was a little bit more expensive, but you just throw it in the glove compartment, it's there. But my last question, is there a standard informational awareness training in place for those that in a position to enforce this law?
There really isn't. I mean, what I would like to see is guidelines developed, authoritative guidelines, possibly through the American Veterinary Medical Association or in the state Veterinary Medical Association, that specifically looks at the science and says, based on what we know here, we can, because I think I could do that, but I think it's important that it comes from an authoritative source based on science. And I think that across the country, the data that we have on heat dynamics and dogs' physiology does not it does not vary from state to state or town to town or even country to country. It is what it is.
It's a science.
It's a science. And
right.
So why we are trying to find different solutions in different towns and different states, we can still have that if we have authoritative guidelines that say, if it is this temperature, the dog must be removed. Or the dog must be monitored. It really comes down to that. The dog has to be removed from the car or monitored.
Right.
Otherwise, we're turning our back on these dogs.
Well, I think Vermont has a great law, and we just have to make sure that people are aware of it and know how to use it and enforce it, have it be enforced. I'm very excited. Let's work on this together. Let's, Carol, I love your idea about the town, when people go to register their dogs, have information right there to be handed out. That's doable. It's easy. I actually thought about having little signs made up, paper signs by the cash registers of local businesses that they could take. In fact, we just came up with something like that. But, it's getting it out to people, because people do love their animals. The reason why the dogs are with them in the first place is because they love them. They want them with them, yeah.
It's a family member.
But just like children die, 40 children. That's horrible. And the dogs,
Well, the other piece to it is it's an unintentional form of animal cruelty.
Right.
Because it's unintentional, that speaks to the fact that we need more public education.
Yes. And could you imagine how horrible you feel after that happens? Your best friend literally roasts to death.
Well, people express remorse when
Yeah.
it does happen there, and 3 people this summer stated to the media in their media reports, no one ever told me not to do this, and sometimes you have to tell people.
I do want to say something before we end. Don't think that leaving your animal in a car or your child in the car with the air conditioner on is okay. I personally experienced leaving my dog in my caravan with the engine running, and 3 minutes later I had people coming into Staples saying, your car is ready to catch on fire. Smoke was coming out from underneath. I don't know if it's because it was a big car or whatever. I had to go out and grab my dog out quickly. The firemen came and they said, don't ever leave your car running with the air conditioner on. It's like, that was news to me. So, okay. Carol, Barry, thank you so much for the show today.
Oh, thank you,
And
Sue.
for all the work you do.
Well, thank you.
And thank you very much for watching For the Animals, and I hope to see you again next week. We've just come out into the parking lot of the studio to test our thermal gun on some cars. It's September 20th. It's a gorgeous day outside. The temperature right now is 77 degrees by the thermometer. And we have our laser gun. We just randomly picked a car. Inside the thermal, oh my goodness, it's 135.5 degrees. Carol had a good point. It's fair season right now, and people are coming from all over the state to different events. And
Parking lots are large and exposed, and if people cannot bring their dogs into the fairgrounds, they're going to leave them in the car. So we tend to think that the danger for dogs is over come September, but we're still in the season.
let's go to a car that has the window slightly open. We just walked over to a car that has the windows open on both sides, and we'll check theirs. 95 degrees, 96, 97, 98. Okay, it's leveling off at 97. Oh, it's warm in here.
Okay,
It is warm in here.
can you hold the thing inside the car?
A 101.5. This is a dark car. Let's see if it makes any difference as far as the color of the car. 118. It's our producers, and it's been here 3 hours. 118. And Andrea just pointed out that this car has tinted windows.
And there's a 40-degree difference between the internal and external temperature. So when we feel incredibly comfortable at 78 degrees, it's 118 degrees inside that vehicle.
Glad your dog's at home. I'm glad your cat's at home too.
At dusk, there came a turning. There was a moment when all was known. You could feel